My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 32. And this is the story of how a group chat I wasn't supposed to see showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I should start with a kitchen, because that's where the first fault line cracked open. It was a Tuesday in late April, the kind of Ohio morning that couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring. My mother's house sits on a flat street in Worthington, just north of Columbus, with a maple out front that used to be small enough for my brother and me to hang from and pretend we were astronauts. Now the branches scrape the second-story windows. Mom says the sound comforts her at night. When I arrived, she was in her bathrobe, coaxing an ancient coffeemaker through its last days, swearing softly under her breath like someone talking to a stubborn pet. "You're a sight for sore eyes," she said, turning and smiling too brightly. Her hair, still a warm chestnut despite the decades, because she was loyal to her salon the way some people are loyal to sports teams, was swept back with a barrette I remembered from high school. Her robe had a coffee stain on the belt. "Can you help me with the bank thing?" She'd texted me an hour earlier. Something about a portal not loading on her iPad. I'm a project manager for a small architecture firm downtown, which in my mother's mind translates to knows computers. That's my role, unofficial, but impossible to shake. The person who makes forms, submit, and routers behave. My brother Ryan is a gym teacher in Cincinnati, and somehow managed to dodge these requests by being 2 hours away. My Aunt Evelyn, the original Evelyn, not to be confused with my grandmother Evelyn, lives in Florida now and calls in the evenings, a time of day when my mother's bank things become less urgent. "Show me," I said, setting my tote bag on a chair that wobbled no matter how many felt pads I stuck under it. She handed me the iPad like it was a delicate piece of glass. "It says Face ID, but it doesn't know my face," she said. Honestly, who decides what counts as a face? Sometimes I don't think I have one. Not since your grandmother passed. Her voice thinned on that last sentence, and I felt the familiar tug. Grief and caretaking, braided so tightly together I couldn't tell which I was responding to. It had been 4 months since Grandma's funeral, a quiet service at St. Michael's where we all wore navy and tried to be as organized as she would have liked. My grandmother was a list maker and a gardener, a woman who believed in frozen cookie dough for emergencies, and never met a neighbor she didn't bring tomatoes to in August. I swiped up on the iPad, navigated to the bank app, watched the little wheel spin, and thought of Grandma's voice telling me to keep my shoulders back. "It wants your face," I said to my mother. "Let's re-enroll it." She lifted the tablet and did a hesitant little nod, like she was bowing to a queen. The device purred and accepted her. "See?" I said. "You have a face." She laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She set the iPad on the counter and reached for the kettle. Steam rose in a thin ribbon. The window over the sink was crowded with plants, their leaves glossy from the mist bottles she used every morning. There was a small ceramic teapot my grandmother had painted in a class at the community center, all tiny pink roses. I always notice the things that hold us together, even when they're doing it quietly. "While you're here," my mother said, letting the tea bag steep, "can you check the messages thing? Your aunt keeps sending me articles, and I swear, one of them gave me a virus. Something about elder fraud. Do you mean Safari?" "I mean the thing that opens when I press the blue compass," she said, making a face, and passed the iPad back. I took it. Maybe I should say that the mistake was simple. It makes it sound cleaner that way, like it could be undone with a different tap. My thumb brushed a banner I didn't mean to touch, a rectangle that slid down from the top of the screen with a light chime. It was a new message in a group called Evie's Circle. The preview showed my aunt's name, Aunt Evie. Really. Evelyn, but never to her face, and a sentence that snapped my spine straight. "Patricia, keep the Friday transfer quiet. Nora doesn't need to be pulled into this. She's fine on her own." My mother set the mugs down with a clink. "Milk or lemon?" I've had moments in my life when time seemed to widen, like a road unspooling. This wasn't like that. Everything. Sharpened rudely, the way it does when you try on glasses you didn't know you needed. I felt the iPad's weight in my hands, familiar and foreign all at once. The message expanded when I tapped the banner. I didn't mean to open it, I told myself, but my thumb didn't get the memo. The group chat bloomed across the screen. There they all were, in a neat stack of bubbles that burst silently in my chest. Mom, labeled Patricia, using the leaf emoji she puts next to every seasonal table-setting photo. Aunt Evie, her messages peppered with exclamation points. My cousin Chloe, a few years younger than me, who can make anything look lacquered and expensive with one swipe of her camera. Ryan, my brother, most recently seen posting videos of dodgeball drills. Even Uncle Don, though he stays quiet in every thread he's been added to since the invention of smartphones. I scrolled up. I know you're not supposed to scroll up when it isn't your business. The polite thing would have been to hand the iPad back and say something mundane about cookies. But the group was called Evie's Circle, like a wreath I hadn't been invited to stand inside. And there, threaded through a week of chatter about Memorial Day plans and whether Dad should still be mowing the lawn, were the messages that hollowed me out. Chloe, Grandma's portfolio is still with First Ohio, right? Patricia, yes. They set up a beneficiary account, 2 disbursements this month. We'll handle it Friday with the advisor. Ryan, Mom, we're just doing what Grandma intended. Chloe, exactly. It's not like Nora needs it. She's got that job, and she never wanted kids. Patricia, please, no arguing. It's better if this stays simple. Ryan, we all agreed. Chloe's saving for grad school. I've got the house repairs. Nora is stable. Chloe, also she'll make it weird if she thinks we're taking anything away. She's sensitive. The word typed by people who have never bled out quietly in a bathroom and then dried their hands and gone back to dinner. I could feel my own face go still. My mother was stirring honey into her tea. The tiny rose teapot sat like a witness, pretending to be decorative. I scrolled further and found it. A screenshot of Grandma's will, the part where it detailed a modest brokerage account that would be split evenly between her daughter Patricia and her 2 grandchildren, for their education, housing, or otherwise, in the phrasing of a lawyer who believed in the word otherwise. 4 months ago, our attorney cousin Lauren had read this aloud in the conference room at First Ohio, while we all nodded like bobbleheads. I remembered the lingering smell of old carpet and toner, the way the banker's pen made a soft whisper as it slid off the paper. The language had felt loving then. It felt like breath itself. I had assumed, with the gentle arrogance of someone who believes in the fairness of math, that the split would be 3 ways: my mother, my brother, and me. Everyone had nodded. No one had said anything out loud about circles. And yet, here, in the specific sentences of a chat that moved beneath the surface of my daily life, was the plan. Let my mother accept the funds, and then distribute them to my brother and cousin. Call it help for real needs. Tell themselves I was fine because I had a job and a small, tidy apartment and a car payment I made on time. Call it administratively easier. Call it anything but what it felt like, an erasure written in taps and swipes. I set the iPad down gently, exactly as I'd found it, the way you replace a museum artifact after touching it when you know you shouldn't. My mother handed me a mug. "Honey," she said, "try this chamomile, it's lovely." The tea smelled like late afternoons at my grandmother's when she'd place a saucer beneath my mug and say, "Breathe it in, Nora. It makes the rest of the day more manageable." My throat closed. I took a sip and nodded. My mother smiled because that's what happens when you nod. She doesn't always notice what my nod is covering. For 20 minutes, I taught her how to use the face thing and set up text notifications. I showed her how to categorize her email so that forwards from Aunt Evie didn't go to spam, even though that's where I wanted them. I reset the Wi-Fi. I puttered around her kitchen like the daughter in a magazine photo about balancing caregiving and career. All soft light and gentle competence. The whole time, the chat pulsed behind my sternum like a small red light saying wreck. I left my mother's house in a drizzle that turned the sidewalk slick. I stood under the maple and watched the drops collect into a thin stream that ran along the curb. It's funny what you notice when you're trying not to cry. The leaves looked like hands. The street felt like a hallway to a room I didn't want to enter. I sat in my car and waited for the fog on the windshield to clear, my fingers worrying the frayed seam on my steering wheel cover. I could hear my grandmother telling me not to pick at it. I could see the not-picking version of me like a ghost girl in the passenger seat. Her nails clean and short, her hair tucked behind one ear. When I finally drove to my apartment, I went straight to the small table by the window where I set up to throw clay. The wheel is new, my first big purchase after paying off the last of my student loans. I don't make anything fancy. Small bowls, vases that tilt a little. It's not a secret, my ceramics, but it lives in the space I keep where my mother's expectations can't hear. She calls it my crafting, and says it the way people say hobby, like it's a polite disease. I sat on the stool, stared at the block of clay wrapped in wet cloth and didn't touch it. I was vibrating with an awareness so sharp I could have cut the clay with it. The chat called me sensitive. My brother called me stable. My cousin called me childless like it was a moral category. The plan was to keep me out of Friday's appointment, because money belongs to the people who say they need it loudly, not to the person who watches silently and files everything under the correct label. The truth rose in my throat. It was never about the money. Not to them. Not really. To them, money was a way to arrange the furniture of the family. You put the couch here, the lamp there, the people with children under the window where the light is good. You tuck the person who always shows up with a spreadsheet into the corner where she can reach the outlet. A thought occurred to me in a clear, quiet way. I needed to stop being furniture. I opened my laptop. For 3 breaths, my body tried to go into fix mode, the one where I write a well-reasoned email, include attachments, ask for clarity with bullet points. Hello, Mom. Quick question. Can you confirm Friday's meeting time at First Ohio? I'd like to make sure my schedule allows. But I didn't open my email. I opened a document. I typed my grandmother's name at the top, Evelyn Joy Bennett. Under it, I wrote the date of the will. I wrote the names of the beneficiaries, the meeting, the messages I had seen. I described what was happening with the detachment I reserved for project timelines. It helped me flood less. After an hour, I had a memo. It read like something I could hand to someone in a suit who would know what to do with it. I wasn't sure yet who that would be. I saved it and closed my laptop gently, the way my grandmother closed the oven door when she made apple crisp so the topping wouldn't collapse. That night, the rain stopped and the neighborhood smelled like laundry. From my window, I could see the tiny courtyard behind my building. Someone had left a bike by the gate. The chain caught the last bit of light as it swung. I thought of my grandmother's hands tying a bow on a box of cookies for the church bake sale, the way her knuckles were big and beautiful, looking like strength had settled there permanently. "We do right by each other," she'd say in the offhand voice people use when they're setting a standard they assume no one will challenge. Here's where things got complicated. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "Sweetheart, remember I have that appointment Friday afternoon. I might need you to let the plumber in later." The water heater has been in a long-term flirtation with death. I read it twice, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into, "Come with me." I typed back, "I can't, meeting downtown." Then I put my phone face down and stared at my wheel until the clay looked like a timing device I didn't know how to disarm. The architecture firm where I work has an office in an old brick building that smells like coffee and sawdust, the way creative places always do when they want to feel like a workshop and not a job. I ran the morning stand-up, checked that materials had arrived for the community center renovation in Linden, and tried to read my day through the muscle memory of competence. Mid-morning, I called a lawyer whose name I found through another name, the way you get to the person you actually need if you've been in a city long enough and done a few favors. Her assistant put me on hold. When the line clicked and the lawyer's voice arrived, measured, curious, no nonsense, I felt something click into place in me. "2. Walk me through it," she said. I gave her the outline, the overall structure. holding back the part that hurt in case it muddied my delivery. She asked questions that were almost tender in their precision. Did you see anything in writing? Was your name included on the original reading? Were there any instructions about discretionary control? She said the word discretionary like she was stepping around a puddle. I told her everything I'd seen in the chat, careful not to sound like I'd been snooping. It came up while I was helping my mom, I said, and it was both true and not enough. I told her I had a memo. I could feel her thinking on the other end of the line. It may be less about the will and more about the actions after, she said. If your mother receives the funds and distributes them to the others, bypassing you, when the will included you at the initial reading. She paused. There are options, but the fastest path is sometimes the most straightforward. Send a letter. Make it clear you are aware. Ask for an equitable split and transparency around Friday's transfer. Would that burn the house down? I asked, aware that we were speaking in architecture metaphors. It depends on whether the house is currently on fire, she said dryly. Do you want me to draft something today? I thought of my grandmother's list pad on her fridge that had little check boxes drawn beside each line. I checked one out loud. Yes. When I hung up, the office had shifted back into its normal, pleasant chaos. Someone laughed at the printer. Someone said, "Do you want a donut?" And I said no, before I remembered that when things are hard, you should say yes to small sweetness. I took a later donut and ate it at my desk while the lawyer's email arrived. A crisp, warm document that made a rational kind of sense. I forwarded it to my mother and to Aunt Evie because her name was all over the plan in my head. I wrote, for transparency around Friday's meeting and to confirm my understanding of Grandma's wishes. And then I attached the letter. My finger hovered over send for a beat that felt like a full minute. Then I sent it. There was an hour of quiet. You know that quiet. The one where nothing is happening on your phone and your heart is very loud. Then came the pings, one after another, the way popcorn pops all at once after a too long pause. Ryan. Nora, what is this? Why did you lawyer up over a family matter? Chloe. Seriously, Nor? This is harsh, Mom. Honey, this is getting complicated. Let's handle it privately. Please don't make this adversarial. I typed and deleted 20 responses. My favorite one, which I did not send, said, it became adversarial when I was removed from a group chat named after our grandmother. Instead, I forwarded their messages to the lawyer and then, because I am human and unedited and private, I texted my best friend, Danny. Say something that will keep me from driving to my mother's house and standing on the porch with a bullhorn. She replied with exactly one line. You don't need to be louder. You need to be clearer. There are days I want to get her name tattooed on my forearm. I woke up Thursday with the desire to drive to Lake Erie and stare at water for a few hours. Instead, I did the small things that make big things less scary. I made my bed tightly enough that my grandmother would have approved. I took my vitamins. I wore the navy blazer that feels like a hug delivered by a person with very good posture. I called the lawyer and told her she could send the follow-up email she'd drafted overnight. The one that drew a line in a fine-point pen. Not a paint roller. She did. And then people behaved the way they do when confronted by consequences they didn't expect. My cousin Chloe posted a vague message on social media about toxic negativity and choosing joy. My brother left me a voicemail about working this out like adults, which made me laugh in the kitchen and then sit on the floor. My mother sent me a long text about how money is the least important thing in the world, which always sounds profound until someone uses it as a reason to take yours. By noon, my lawyer called. They've retained counsel, she said, satisfaction tucked into her tone like a folded napkin. And they'd like to settle quickly. What does quickly mean? By Friday, she said, which is convenient. We discussed numbers, but it wasn't about the numbers, not exclusively. It was about the part of me that had agreed, quietly and for years, that my needs were smaller because I didn't frame them on the mantle. It was about the part of me that had perfected helpfulness, which is a language that sounds like love until you realize you've learned it as survival. The lawyer suggested a clean split of the intended amount and a brief statement that acknowledged my place. Not as an administrator, but as a person. I don't need anyone to write me a poem, I said, surprised by how quickly the sentence came out. I just need them to stop pretending I can't read. Then we'll keep it simple, she said. That afternoon, a settlement letter pinged into my inbox like something expensive arriving by courier. I read it standing in my kitchen because sitting felt like too much surrender. I looked at the number. I thought of my grandmother's handwriting, all loops and fierce clarity. I thought of the Evie's circle chat and felt a strange wash of relief. At least there had been a name. It's easier to leave a room when someone had the nerve to hang a sign over the door that says, "You're not allowed." I signed. That night, I didn't sleep much. The wind hit the building in bursts and made the windows hum. I thought of Friday, the way numbers reach their destinations with a few attentive keystrokes. I thought of how I would feel when my phone buzzed with a deposit notification. I thought of what I wanted that feeling to be. Before dawn on Friday, I drove to the community ceramics studio on High Street, the one that opens at 6 because some of us need to touch something real before we talk to anyone. The studio manager, whose name is Gretel and who wears paint-splattered clogs like armor, gave me a nod and went back to reshaping a ruined mug. There's a kind of permission in that place, a hum that says, it's fine to make something ugly until it's beautiful. I sat at a wheel that wobbled slightly and started a cylinder, which is what you make when you don't know what you're making. My phone buzzed. I looked down. The bank app notification said what bank app notifications always say, which is both too much and not nearly enough. You have received a deposit. The number followed, crisp and unsentimental. Large enough to pay off my car, to build up my savings cushion, to buy a better wheel if I wanted one. The amount my grandmother intended divided as if we all lived in a world where the idea of equal held. I put the phone face down on the table next to the clay. I did not cry, which surprised me. Instead, I felt something in my shoulders release, like a knot acknowledging it had been tied for too long. I kept working the cylinder until it became a vase, unremarkable except for the way the lip curved slightly outward at the end. When I cut it off the bat, the bottom made a tiny sigh. A sound potters know, the moment wet clay detaches and a form becomes itself. I set it on a board. The studio smelled like wet earth. I felt my grandmother like a warm hand between my shoulder blades, steadying, not pushing. When I got home, I opened my laptop. I wrote an email to my mother, my brother, and my cousin. It was not elegant. It was civilized. I've received the deposit, I wrote. Going forward, please exclude me from unpaid roles I have filled as a matter of habit. Family tech support, document editor, tax translator. I will happily recommend professionals who can help. I love you all, in the way that love is sometimes a practice more than a feeling, but I won't be furniture anymore. I hesitated at the last line, and then left it, because sometimes you need to tell the truth, in a way that's both clear and kind, which is not the same thing as gentle. Responses arrived as you might expect. My mother called and left a message that started with "sweetheart" and ended with, "We've always done our best." My brother sent a thumbs-up emoji. Chloe wrote, "If this is what you need to feel okay," which was both generous and not. I didn't reply. Not to be dramatic, just to be quiet the way you are when there's nothing useful to add. That afternoon, after I finished a site walk for a small park our firm is helping redesign, I drove to my grandmother's house. The new owners haven't moved in yet. It's in that in-between stage where the curtains are gone, and you can see the bones of a place. I stood on the sidewalk and stared at the porch where we'd once lined up for a photo. Me in braces, Ryan with a cowlick so committed it should have been named, Grandma in a sweater the color of peaches. I thought of all the meals in that kitchen, the way my grandmother would accept help the first time it was offered and refuse it the second, a strange logic I didn't understand as a kid. Now I think it was about dignity, a way of saying, I am not a problem, I am a person. I walked around the block. One of the neighbors, Mr. Willis, stood at the end of his driveway, peering into his mailbox as if it might talk. When he saw me, he smiled. "Nora," he said, like a man remembering a person much younger than the one in front of him. "I was just telling my wife the other day about your grandmother's brownies, the ones with the shiny tops." "She'd like that," I said. "She liked being remembered for the shiny tops." He nodded. "Your grandmother always told us, make sure everyone gets a square." We stood there for a second, the weight of an entire family theology rotating into place. "I will, Mr. Willis," I said, which didn't make literal sense in the moment, but felt deeply correct. "I will." Here's the part where I tell you that the next few months were both ordinary and not. On the surface, nothing dramatic happened. The settlement money did what money is supposed to do when you were raised by women who kept the envelope straight. It paid some things off, it made a cushion, it helped me sleep. I started teaching a Saturday morning ceramics class at the community studio. The class is called Bowls and Boundaries, which makes people laugh until they realize I'm serious about both. At work, a junior architect named Luis asked me if I'd co-lead a design charrette for a neighborhood plaza. I said yes, because I have a hard time refusing the tasks that let me proofread the world and make it neater. But I also blocked out 2 evenings a week in my calendar that simply said studio, and when someone tried to schedule over them, I said, I'm not available, and didn't explain. I'm learning that not explaining is a form of honesty. Family life shifted into a version that kept me from getting whiplash. There were texts, nothing with the word circle in it. There were photos of my cousin Chloe's new apartment with crown molding that made her heart sing in all caps. My brother sent a video of his students throwing a perfect relay. My mother invited me to brunch on a Sunday and said, I'll pay, as if that would fix anything. I went, because sometimes going is how you practice the muscle that says, I can be present and still be a person. She showed me a photo album she'd made with my grandmother's snapshots and left a sticky note on the page with my face in 9th grade. Nora, science fair, volcano. It was absurd and sweet and made me laugh, in a way that surprised both of us. The conversation I had with my mother that day is one I've replayed enough times to know which parts I wish I could redub with better lines. It started simple, as these things do when you are both trying not to be the worst version of yourselves. I didn't know how to do it, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee, long past the point sugar can dissolve. Any of it. After she died. You didn't have to know, I said. You just had to ask. I thought if I kept the noisy parts quiet, she said, I could keep us together. It wasn't quiet, I said, and didn't say your quiet was very loud in my head. She blinked fast, the way she does when she thinks she's going to cry and then decides she won't. You're good at making things look easy, she said. That's not a compliment, I said, and she winced because she meant it that way. It's something I learned because I had to. We sat like that, the air conditioner a little too enthusiastic above our heads, the pancakes getting cold on our plates. At some point, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine, which is not something we do. I'm sorry, she said. For which part? I asked, which surprised both of us. For all the ones that added up to you thinking you were furniture, she said. Something unrolled in my chest like a rug you've been keeping in a closet and forgot was beautiful. Thank you, I said, which is not forgiveness but is a map to it. A week later, she texted me a photo of a group chat she had created. It was called Family Logistics, which made me laugh in the car to no one. She had added me and Ryan and Chloe, and then, after what I imagine were a few minutes of heavy consideration, she added her sister. There were no flowers in the title, no inside jokes, no emojis. I stayed, I didn't mute it. These are details that matter when you're rebuilding a small bridge. One afternoon in July, Danny and I sat on my balcony with slices of watermelon sprinkled with salt, because salt on watermelon is a thing my grandmother swore by, and she was right about most things. Heat pressed against the city like an extra layer of clothing. The vase I'd made the morning of the deposit sat on the small table between our chairs. It had a hairline crack where I'd trimmed the lip too thin. You could only see it if the light caught it. You're glowing, Danny said. Are you in love with a pot? Yes, I said, and she snorted. Also with the idea that I can love something and not have to prove it to anyone. She looked at me over her sunglasses. That's growth, friend. I keep thinking about circles, I said. Who draws them? Who gets to open them? You can draw your own, she said. They won't be perfect. Nothing is, I said, and we ate our watermelon and watched a thunderhead muscle its way over the horizon. Late that summer, I got a postcard from my cousin Chloe. The front showed a museum in Chicago, designed by someone whose buildings make people cry. On the back, she wrote, I went to see the textiles exhibit you posted about. You were right. I cried in the room with all the quilts. I'm trying to learn to sew. Don't tell anyone. I have a brand to maintain. Then, in smaller letters along the edge where the mail sorting machine usually smudges the ink, "I'm sorry I called you sensitive. I think what I meant is that you feel things the way things should be felt." I stuck the card to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a tiny croissant. I stood there for a long time, not crying, not smiling, just standing. There's a version of me that would have texted back immediately with a heart or a joke. Instead, I sent a photo of the vase with the crack and typed, "It holds water just fine." In September, our firm presented the final drawings for the Linden Plaza. We'd tucked in a small raised platform that could be a stage on Fridays and a place to sit most other days. We'd planned a rain garden for the low spot under the ash tree where the grass always refused to grow. When the neighborhood voted to approve the design, one of the elders in the community stood up and said, "You listened." I nodded and wrote the word down because it's as close to a profession as I've ever wanted. It didn't escape me that listening is what finally pulled me back to myself. The fall brought small rituals into sharper focus. At the ceramic studio, I built a set of bowls in a gradient of blues that made the shelf look like a lake in October. I gave one to my mother. We were both awkward when I handed it to her. She touched the curve like she was asking permission. "It's beautiful," she said, which might be a sentence that heals more than any apology in the long run. On the anniversary of my grandmother's passing, I visited the cemetery alone. The wind was selfish that day, pulling my scarf and making nonsense of my hair. I brushed leaves from the stone with my sleeve. The ground was still soft from a week of rain. I stood there until a blue jay scolded me for occupying its airspace. "I did okay," I said out loud, feeling ridiculous and strangely okay with being ridiculous. "I know you wanted everyone to get a square." A woman a few rows over looked up with a quick, polite smile, the kind you give someone who is definitely talking to the dead, but isn't bothering anyone. On my way back to the car, I passed a young couple arguing gently about whether chrysanthemums are cheerful or depressing. It made me laugh, and the sound felt like someone opening a window. I won't pretend everything is fine. It isn't, not in a glossy way. There are days my mother says something about how hard it is without your grandmother, and I have to leave the room because the grief in her voice sounds suspiciously like an excuse for avoiding accountability. There are days my brother texts me an article about communicating with empathy, and I want to throw my phone into the river. There are days my cousin's social media makes me pick up my phone and then put it down very carefully, like it's fragile, and I'm not a destroyer. But there are also days when my mother asks me if I can come over to help with the winter clothes, and I say no, and she says, "Okay, another time," and nothing breaks. There are days when Ryan calls to tell me one of his students wants to be an architect and asks if I'll talk to her class, and I say yes without feeling like a utility. There are days when Chloe sends me a photo of a crooked hem and asks if it's fixable, and I send back a video showing her how to press the seam, and she replies with 6 heart emojis and a "you're witchcraft," and I feel a softness I thought might be gone for good. One quiet Wednesday night in December, I was glazing a little cup, turning it in my fingers the way you turn a problem to see which angle makes it solvable. Snow tapped the window like it was practicing. The radio played a song my grandmother loved, one with violins that always made her put a hand to her throat. My phone lit up with a message from my mother in the family logistics chat. "Cookie day Saturday? I'm thinking brownies with the shiny tops." There was a long pause, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 10 years, before Chloe replied, "I'll bring the pan we like." And Ryan wrote, "I'll bring sprinkles even though Grandma hated sprinkles." And I typed, "I'll bring the good vanilla," even though I wanted to write something smart about ingredient hierarchy. The invite didn't feel like absolution. It felt like a stare. I could step up or not, but it was a stare. On Saturday, I went. The house was warm in the way old houses are when the oven has been on for hours. My mother wore the barrette again and handed me an apron with pears on it. Ryan had brought a bag of sprinkles that we didn't use. Chloe had a camera slung over her shoulder, inevitably. We stood around the kitchen island and measured and whisked and scraped bowls and told stories about my grandmother that all started with, "Remember when?" The stories weren't different. We were. When the brownies cooled, we cut them into squares. My mother held the straight edge like a ceremonial knife. She looked at me. "Nora?" she said, lifting her eyebrows toward the pan. And the question was so small and so enormous that for a second, my breath forgot itself entirely. "Diagonal," I said, because Grandma always did diagonals when there were more people than squares, and then I laughed at the bossiness of it. And my mother laughed too. Relief landing like a bird on her shoulder, we divided the brownies with care. Everyone got a piece with a shiny top. My mother slid a square onto a plate and handed it to me. And in that moment, the kitchen looked the way it had when I was 10 and hoping for the corner piece. I took a bite. It tasted like sugar and cocoa, and the idea that love, when it is done well, feeds you without keeping score. I'm not naive. I know we could have a day where this all blows sideways again. I know Evie's circle might live in someone's phone like a ghost we haven't exorcised. But I also know this. When I opened the chat that Tuesday and felt the world tilt, what I really learned was my job description in this family was never fixed. I'd built part of it myself out of usefulness and high-functioning silence. I'd been rewarded with the kind of trust you give to furniture, and then I stopped saying yes to being an object. In the space that opened, other people had to find their own hands. The moral isn't that I got money. The money helped, yes, in the straightforward way that money does when the radiator needs replacing, and the dentist's office insists you need a crown. The moral is that I learned how to draw a line and call it a boundary, how to send a letter and not apologize for its existence, how to be part of a family without dissolving into it. I learned that circles can be widened. I learned that sensitive is not an insult. It's a description of a person tuned to frequencies others ignore. I learned that the things I make with my hands hold water even when they crack a little. Family should be about love, not control. It should be about squares cut carefully and diagonals chosen with intention and group chats, where no one has to guess if their name belongs at the top. I'm not saying we're fixed. I'm saying we're honest. And that finally feels like enough.